as was mentioned, I'm working a little bit on the ethics of video games right now. It's not my dissertation, but I've developed a bit of an interest in it. I'm going to talk a little bit, mostly about the ethics of video games, although there is some relevant empirical research that's going on. And it's quite interesting because depending on the sort of ethical perspective you take on video games, that's going to depend on whether you're interested in the empirical research to begin with at all. So just a little, this is typical for philosophy, but first I'm going to talk about some different moral theories. So just a hand, has anybody taken, if you haven't taken intro to ethical theory, I just want to know for people if I'm going to be, okay, yeah. Most people have taken intro to ethical theory, hopefully. But we're going to talk a little bit about these different positions, again, in the ethics of video games, how they're interested in the empirical literature, and then what's going on in contemporary moral theory. And then I'm going to talk about some stuff related to ethical design and gameplay. And then there's just a whole host of other interesting philosophical issues besides ethics in video games. And so at the end, I'm just going to give you a bonus level on some stuff, related to, aesthetics, metaphysics, and other things that you might be interested in, even if you're not just interested in ethics. So, when we're doing moral theory, we're interested in what's making an action right or wrong, at least according to certain moral theories, right? So, we're also sometimes interested in what makes someone a good or bad person, or what makes them morally blameworthy or praiseworthy. In the case of video games, we're going to talk about that. So deontic concepts are usually used to evaluate actions as being right or wrong, and evaluative concepts are used to evaluate people, things, or states of affairs in these sort of thick evaluative ways like good, bad, or again, blameworthy, and so on. So I'm going to talk about three different theories just to get them on the table, and then we're going to look at the ethics of video games more specifically. So consequentialism is interested in particular about what sorts of things are good or bad for their own sake, and we're going to see what they say about that. Deontology is mostly interested in theories of right action and what makes an action right or wrong. And then the Aristotelian, we're going to see, talks about virtue characteristics, so virtues and vices that contribute to our having certain traits of character and being able to evaluate us in light of those things. So, according to consequentialism, this is just the bare bones theory that you would get in Intro to Ethics. So they think that actions are morally right or wrong, depending on whether they promote the best consequences in the scenario compared to the different alternatives. So here you think of traditional trolley problem cases and so on. Utilitarianism is a specific version of consequentialism, and the utilitarians think that well-being is the only thing that should be valued for its own sake. So it's the only thing that's intrinsically good. And the consequentialist and utilitarian also think that the well-being of everyone affected by the actions that we're interested in. So it's not just you yourself, it's everyone sort of affected by the consequences of it. And here, what's going to be most important is that the utilitarian and the consequentialist more generally think that when we're doing ethics of video games, we should be sort of weighing up the positive and negative effects of video games, and we're going to see how they're interested in empirical stuff for that. So again, very I'm trying to skip over pretty quickly some complicated things in moral theory that we would usually do an entire seminar on, but broadly speaking, there's this view called deontology, and they're more interested in theories of right action, right, compared to which things are intrinsically valuable. So according to the deontologist, an action is going to be evaluated as morally right or wrong according to whether it's done out of a good will. And according to the sort of Kantian view that we teach in Intro to Ethics, the goodwill, what makes it good is that it's unconditionally valuable or valuable for its own sake. And so this is what usually separates a deontological view from a consequentialist view, because the deontologist thinks that an action can be right or wrong totally independent from its consequences. And we're going to see how that's relevant in a moment. Also just quickly, there's these two versions of the categorical imperative, and Immanuel Kant thought that our goodwill is good insofar as it follows either version of the categorical imperative. And we're going to see how people have been trying to talk about video games as violating either version of the categorical imperative. And the first one is talking about sort of abstracting out and thinking about people in similar circumstances and whether they could follow the same sorts of reasons or maxims for action that you are. And then the other version, the second version of the categorical imperative, talks about treating other people's and yourself, the humanity in them, always as an end in itself and never as a means to some end. So we're going to look at that more specifically in a moment. But now let's last talk about virtue ethics, right? So virtue ethics, thanks to Aristotle, is interested not in right or wrong actions or what sorts of things are intrinsically good or bad. The Aristotelian is interested in traits of character. So they're mostly interested in evaluating people as blameworthy or praiseworthy. And this is usually done by different traits of character, as I was saying, that are either virtuous or vicious. And let's see. So the important point is that for traits of character, they're usually charted out as excesses or avoiding excesses on either side. So living courageously would be in excess or deficiency, vicious, but done the right way would be a virtuous trait of character. And important for Aristotle is that virtues are not these things that we can just sort of do at one time and then take a break and then come back to it. He thinks that they're things that we're habituated into, and these are stable and complex characteristics or dispositions that we have. And it involves not just doing certain things, but doing the things for the right reasons, and having certain reactive attitudes or emotions helping motivate those actions. And people more contemporary literature have been spelling this out in terms of like thinking in the right way when you're doing the virtuous thing. Also important, just very quickly, that virtues and vices are not something that we're born into or things that we have innately. So again, it's something that we have to learn over time. So those are the three main theories in ethics that we just need to get on the table for, again, people who haven't taken an intro to ethics class. So why the interest in video games to begin with, right? You might think that like video games are kind of childish and something that moral theory might not be interested in at all, but as the sort of, the title of the panel implies, video gaming is actually a gigantic technological industry, and it's one that's contributing a lot of GDP, and it's turning into a multi-billion-dollar industry that's giving a lot of jobs and growth and so on. So there's the, let's see, in the bubble, it's projected, it was projected in 2022 that by next year, the global gaming industry is going to be worth almost $322 billion. So it's not just a sort of entertainment purpose. There's also, for example, you're noticing these entertainment or like esports leagues, and also universities such as Concordia, McGill, and others that are setting up esports varsity teams. So video gaming is, at least for people outside of that sort of domain, usually talked about as a sort of form of harmless entertainment. So there's this thing called the Entertainment Software Association, and they did this poll where they found that over 60% in most cases for people play video games either because it's fun or just because they want to ease stress and sort of pass the time and forget about everyday life. But at the same time, you also see sort of in the general trend of other forms of media like TV, there's this big moral panic about the things that video games allow us to do, right? So video games let us do things that, if we were to do them in real life would obviously be immoral, as we're going to talk about in a moment. And this is usually when you see people in the government saying like, oh, this is, video games take away people's time, they let them, get radicalized, or, usually there's associations that we're going to see with violence. But this actually, brings up real ethical, considerations or, issues that us ethicists should be interested in. So it's a genuine question who's actually right about whether you can play video games in a certainly, morally suspect way, and whether we can design them in a way that would make them, lead to people doing harm and so on. And then there's also the question about, harm we can do to ourselves. Again, thinking in the Aristotelian sense, harms to your traits of character, and also just considerations about whether what you do in a video game can be morally blameworthy or praiseworthy itself. So I'm interested in, as I'll mention at the end of the talk, in stuff about cheating and hypocrisy. So one thing you might have just thinking in the, oh, sorry, I got a little bit sidetracked here. So I just need to back up a moment. Really emphasizing this idea that video games allow us to explore and identify with values, not just moral values, but also aesthetic values, right? So from notions of fairness and honesty to more aesthetic notions like beauty and narrative, video games are offering us increasingly immersive ways to act out beliefs and values and attitudes that might not be our own in real life. And many of the elements of video games, the way that they're played, the way that they're designed and reacted to, and so on, they can reveal both the values of people who are designing the video games and also people who are playing them. And this is where the particularly ethical issues come in with respect to murder and online sexual relationships, right? So in most cases, there's either NPC or what I'm going to, what are talked about as like permanently murdering someone in a video game, right? So in most cases, you can just like get revived or like regenerated in like Call of Duty video games, you get respawned, and sometimes you're killing like a non-playable character that's just not, it's not a person. But in other cases, especially the ones that are of ethical interest here, are cases like World of Warcraft, where killing someone actually entails permanently deleting from their possession certain, potentially virtually valuable objects like loot and masks and things that are valuable in the video game. There's a very interesting Supreme Court case that if you want to ask me about at the Q&A, I'd love to talk about that. So not just murder, but there's also very ethically suspect or potentially suspect ways that we interact sexually with video games, right? So Mass Effect is one example of a series where you can do this, but there's also more controversial examples. So in 2006 and 2019, these two games called Rape Lay and Rape Day, they were released and then subsequently banned in most countries that I can remember, but essentially they generated a lot of moral panic because, again, it's not just a sexual relationship, but the point of the game is to actually rape a character. So again, there's genuine moral issues here to be dealt with. But this is the part that I was going to get to in a moment. But so you might also just react to these sorts of things and say, well, hold on a minute. These things are not actually happening unless there's someone else on the other side of the video game. After all, it's just pixels you're interacting with, right? So no one's actually getting hurt, and it's just representations of things happening on a screen. And so the idea is that video games are sort of especially separate from ordinary moral rules and reality. This is a position becoming known as amoralism. And essentially the idea is that if you want to morally criticize video games at all, you have to do it from within the perspective of the video game, right? So there's two sorts of ways that people develop this sort of view. The first one, and I'm borrowing here from this fellow named Christopher Bartle. So you can emphasize this point by saying video games are fictional, right? If you're just playing a video game with no one else on the other side, you're not actually hurting anyone, it's just a fictional character. And so this sort of neutralizes any sort of moral weight of the actions. And usually there's examples here, or like arguments by Carty, to say that if we were to extend a sort of moral obligation, or say that we could harm something like a fictional non-playable character, then we would have to provide some sort of argument for why we would think that you couldn't harm someone like in a photograph or something like that, right? Or have other sorts of moral concepts like duty, obligation, and so on apply to them. So the second route to this version of amoralism is that you can argue that, or just place emphasis on the sort of status of video games as games, right? So this is usually drawing on some people like in the game industry and like game studies tradition, right? So there's this thing called the magic circle. That was a term coined by this fellow named Rohan, and the idea is that when we're playing a game in a magic circle, we sort of do away with or tacitly suspend ordinary moral considerations. And the point is that this is like the very point of playing the game, right? So if I were to complain about being lied to in poker, it's not really something that I can complain about because we've agreed to lie to each other and bluff and so on. And so the idea is that we can't really impose any external moral considerations onto this conceptual space called the magic circle. Once we tacitly agree to enter into this conceptual space and say, okay, we're playing the game now. And so here, a quote from Gary Young, he says that moral criticism of video games, either the content or the players themselves, would import a system of morality from outside the game space. So just one, the point is that we have to this is the challenge, is responding to this sort of position to do away with the sort of amorality of video games, right? So as I mentioned, consequentialism is particularly interested in well-being and what sorts of things are intrinsically good or bad. And so they're going to be particularly interested in the empirical evidence that we have about video games and aggression and violence. Now, there is some interesting connections with traditional studies on aggression and violence. So there's this study by Albert Bandura and colleagues, and they used this clown named Bobo. And Bobo, they did sort of aggressive and violent things to Bobo, and then they did it in front of children, and they saw that when they jeered and punched and did the things to Bobo, it led to I can see audio clapping in the back, but it led to them displaying more of this aggressive behavior. Now there's this tricky or particular distinction between aggression and violence. So aggression is behavior that's just aimed at harm, whereas violence actually is that plus the actual harm. So the idea is that we're interested in similar sorts of studies that could give us an insight into whether video games, like the sort of study with Bobo the Clown, sort of give children and other people these arenas to actually act out this aggressive behavior and then learn it themselves. And usually the way that this is done is looking for different proxies in aggressive behavior. So things like blood pressure, sweaty palms, and there's also some other interesting studies about blasting loud noises at people and putting spicier food to give to them once you've played violent video games. So let's see here. So as of about 5 years ago, the American Psychological Association does acknowledge an association between violent video games and some heightened aggressive behavior. But they also acknowledge that there's no direct connection between video games and violent video games and actual real-world violence, despite what you see in the media. Like usually there's some sort of aggressive or violent thing that happens, and then it's attributed to video games. They find out that the person was playing them beforehand. So the issue, though, is that there's a ton of studies out there, but they only show an inconclusive and weak correlation between video games and aggression, but not video games and violence. So this, aggression plus actual harm. But at the same time, there's different ways of studying this sort of phenomenon, and what the APA says is that there's a bunch of different types of studies, and that we should sort of smush them all together. And they say that the studies purporting to show correlation or causation will complement and sort of weigh out each other's strengths and weaknesses. But the one thing to point out is that despite this sort of body of psychological literature on video games and aggression and violence, even if you sort of smush all the studies together and try and say, look, video games don't just correlate with more aggressive behavior, they actually cause it. There's a number of different methodological problems that you're going to run into when you're trying to assess these things. So different studies use different concepts of aggression and violence, and so it's hard to sort of parse out what the data will be telling you. It's also hard to actually define what counts as a violent video game, and this is something that just philosophers are always just banging their heads with definitions. But when you think about it, what counts as violence in a video game? traditional, first-person shooters are pretty violent, but when you get into these like very, very complex and whimsical video games, how much more violent is shooting a teddy bear that goes into a bunch of stars compared to a more realistic representation of shooting someone, right? So it just goes to show that there's like an elusiveness of actually defining violence in a meaningful way in video games, when there's just like a lot of artistic sort of hurdles that you would run into. It's also tricky to pin down what specific aspects of video games themselves might cause violence or aggression. So there's just like reactions to these studies where you say, okay, well, look, there's proxies where you can see that like playing video games makes you more sweaty. You have sweatier palms, your blood pressure raises, but like it's hard to pin down video games as actually causing those proxies, because there's just plenty of other things that you can do to either heighten your blood pressure or cause all the other proxy results, right? So just like watching a video game of playing soccer can be just as inducing as like actually watching soccer, right? Same thing with like fighting or boxing video games and watching real world boxing, right? So that's, if I remember correctly the slides, that's just about all we have to say. I can say a bit more about consequentialism, but now let's look a little bit at deontology, right? So stepping away from the empirical stuff, deontology and virtue ethics are going to be primarily interested in harms to either other people or yourself when you're talking about ethical gameplay, right? And so we're also noticing a shift from just consequentialists being interested in ethical game design, because it's leading to these sorts of measurable, empirically measurable changes in behavior. And the Kantian and Aristotelian are going to be less interested in the empirical stuff and more interested in just sort of establishing that either certain actions in video games are morally wrong or that they display certain traits of character. So that's why we're going, again, from showing that there's this sort of, outweighing of the good effects of video games, again, by how entertaining and just how downright fun they are. And now we're going to look at some stuff in more abstract moral theory, right? So there's a handful of papers, the first by Helen Ryland, and she argues that in multiplayer MMORPG video games, certain types of virtual murder can be exploitative, and they actually can happen without players' tacit consent. So there's some like pretty basic examples of this, which might be hard to find in actual video games, but when you go more deep into it, there's more intuitive examples. So in the first instance, murder might just be forbidden according to the rules of the game, and then of course you can satisfy this sort of internalist or amoralist criteria, or just certain types of murder could be forbidden according to the rules of the game. But more interesting is when standards or just norms pertaining to the virtual murder are ambiguous themselves, or just like the other actions in the virtual space. So has anyone heard of this funeral raid from World of Warcraft? This example?
Is this Leroy Jenkins from 2007?
No, I think it might be a different example. Yeah. But so this isn't, I forget what year it was, but there was someone passed away suddenly, and they were playing World of Warcraft, right? And they were part of a guild. And the guild wanted to pay homage and have a funeral for this person's character. And what the funeral raid is that they had a ceasefire agreement among all the other guilds. And as I mentioned before, when you murder someone in World of Warcraft, you loot their possessions, and they lose it, right? So what happened was that they had the virtual funeral for someone who had passed away in real life, and a rival guild went in and basically, killed everybody, going against the ceasefire agreement. And the question is whether, strictly speaking, according to the rules of the game, it was permissible for them to go in and murder them, but you might think that there's some sort of, tacit agreement or, as I'll mention in a moment, something having to do with like gamesmanship or sportsmanship, where you would say, well, yeah, like murdering is permissible in World of Warcraft, but when there's the ceasefire agreement, in the case of the funeral raid, it would be morally wrong for the guild to go in and murder the people. So another example I didn't have on the slide, but just one more that Ryland mentions is there's like silly examples of like, noob or new experienced players where if you just don't know about the rules of the game, she also thinks that it's exploitative when you go around and if another player didn't know that virtual murder was permitted in the game, she thinks that if you murder someone and they don't know about the rules, then it can happen again without their tacit consent. But that's just another example that's mentioned in the paper. From a different angle, now Ryland was particularly interested in multiplayer video games, but Tobias Flattery has this paper where he tries to argue that even in single player video games, you can have actions that are wrong on deontological grounds. So he discusses two different types of cases, but the main point is that these are cases where there's a violation of the categorical imperative, and so you're, again, sort of acting on reasons that you can't abstract out and say, okay, anyone else can act on similar reasons. So the first type of case that he discusses is when you have an erroneous belief, and the belief leaves out what he says are morally relevant facts about the scenario. So he gives these examples, and again, you're comparing it with traditional examples in deontology. So suppose that there's a sniper, and they're tasked to kill someone. They're taking aim, and they believe that the person they're shooting at is a real person, right? But unbeknownst to them, the police came in and they replaced the person with a mannequin. If the sniper shoots the mannequin, according to the Kantian, they've still done something morally wrong because they've acted on an intention to shoot someone. And this shows how, again, the Kantian is totally, they think there can be wrong actions regardless of the consequences. So Flattery mentions a similar example where someone is playing a video game and they have the erroneous belief that the person or the non-playable character that they're shooting is a real person. And so the idea is that you have a morally wrong intention to kill someone, and it's leaving out your belief that the person is actually virtual. Also, he says that even if you don't hold the belief or have like this erroneous belief, he thinks that there's cases where you can be so immersed in the video game that you represent your own actions as being in a non-virtual scenario. And so the idea is that when you're so immersed in the video game, the way that I put it there is that your representation of your events is as being fictional or virtual, just sort of drops out of your perspective. So you're no longer aware, in some sense, that what you're doing is part of a video game, or it's not real. And the idea here, again, is just that you're acting on intentions or maxims or reasons for action that would violate the categorical imperative if you just swapped out the scenario that you find yourself in with a non-virtual but nearly identical scenario. So lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about virtue ethics before just the sort of teaser for the other philosophical issues. So the virtue ethicist, there's the sort of, Ryland was engaging with, multiplayer video games because the idea is that you have to either, go the way that Flattery does and say that there's certain actions that violate the categorical imperative, or you have to say that there's, sort of harms to yourself being done. And this is precisely the route that the virtue ethicist will take. So, not just, the sort of time and just like, the sort of trope of someone sitting in the basement and playing video games and wasting away their life. The idea would be that there are certain virtuous or vicious traits of character that, depending on how you play a video game, you can cultivate in yourself. So some of them that are discussed by the authors of this book include honesty and dishonesty, and toxicity and kindness, and there's some other ones. They actually list 8, I believe, 8 different sort of pairwise examples. Let's see. So the other idea is that when you're playing video games, there could be ways that you can play them that would allow you to cultivate and indulge these immoral desires, right? So these would be desires to, again, not cause real-world violence, but to do violent things in the video game. And according to the virtue ethicist, these are the sorts of structures of desire that would be sort of indicative of the traits of character that are mentioned, like honesty and dishonesty and so on. And so this is the way that, according to the Aristotelian, when we're aiming for eudaimonia, the video games are not to be left out in a sort of full picture of what human life looks like, right? So just as the Aristotelian would be interested in sports as a sort of avenue or arena to cultivate virtues, they should just be as interested as they are in sports as video games as well. Let's see. Oh, and just the other sort of advantage is that supposedly if you turn the sort of ethical focus to the player themselves, you can also explain both single-player and multiplayer video games, even if you think that Flannery's argument doesn't actually work. There's some recent criticism of him that I don't have time to get into, but so let's look at just a quick example of the virtue ethicist way of thinking and how you might spell out this idea of different traits of character or immoral desires. How many people know of this scene in Grand Theft Auto? It was kind of like a popularized one in the media. So the by the book scene in Grand Theft Auto, you're playing a character who has to again torture someone who's not a real person. There's no one there on the other side. But the idea is that you're torturing the character using very gratuitous methods like waterboarding, electric shock, and teeth extraction. And the idea is that there could be two different types of gamers, right? So you can consider, I named them Adam and Ryan. Suppose that they're playing the same video game, the same by-the-book mission in Grand Theft Auto. The idea is that to complete the video game, or if they're saying, okay, I want to finish the game, they ultimately have to act violently, or else they're just going to sit there and have the game play out, or they could just drop the controller. But the difference that you could notice between two people is that while one person might just be acting out things violently in the video game to complete the game, there could be someone who does that, but it's because they really want to do things with the playable character violently in the video game, right? So again, not wanting to do real world violence, but wanting to do virtual violence in Grand Theft Auto. And here, for people, again, I'm brushing over a bit of stuff that's, you have to know some stuff in literature on free will, but the Aristotelian people in contemporary literature are drawing on this argument from Harry Frankfurt about compatibilism. Compatibilism, just the idea that you can have a totally deterministic world, like, a physicalistic picture of the universe, and that's totally compatible with having free will and moral responsibility. So there's a comparison here between how, when you're playing a video game, the way that the algorithm and sort of option space is set up for you is kind of resembling the way that the deterministic world might be like if, we just found out tomorrow that causal determinism is true, right? So according to Frankfurt, there's this distinction between our freedom of will or freedom of desire and freedom of action. So Frankfurt thinks that even if you find out determinism is true, and all of your actions are totally predetermined from the day that you're born until you die, we still have this little bit of freedom, and that's sufficient for moral responsibility, but it's the freedom to do what you want and to sort of identify with the actions that you are nonetheless, deterministically taking out. And the idea for the Aristotelian is that there's a similar thing going on in video games, right? You might be coerced, or not coerced, but the video game might be prompting you to do violent things, and you might think, well, I have to do violent things to complete the video game. But according to the Aristotelian, what matters is whether you identify with these violent acts that you're taking out with the virtual character. Let's see, getting near the end here. Just a little bit more of I'm trying to give you as much as possible with the little background that I had, but there's this other really interesting philosophical problem called the gamer's dilemma, and there's been an entire secondary literature written on this, responding to one paper that was published in 2009. And the gamer's dilemma basically sets up, when we're reflecting on these different instances of murder and sexual assault, it sets up this really interesting paradox, right? And people have actually pointed out that the paradox applies more generally to all types of virtual media and media more generally, so like fiction and so on. And I'll explain that in a moment. So the idea is that if we're talking about these cases of virtual murder in World of Warcraft, Call of Duty, and so on, it seems pretty plausible that we would take it as true that virtual murder is, in most cases morally permissible. But then we seem to have this opposite sort of moral reaction to cases of virtual sexual assault or pedophilia. And the idea is that if we, accept there's no morally relevant difference between the two types of actions, after all, they're both happening in virtual spaces, not actually happening to real people, it's just representations of actions, then it seems like we would have to deny either one or two. And so there's this bind that you get into, and you have to figure out which of these to reject. So there's a conservative sort of strategy, and those people try and explain some sort of morally relevant difference between, again, most instances of virtual murder and most instances of virtual pedophilia. And the idea is that you're trying to motivate this idea that there's some difference between, most people emphasize a difference between virtual pedophilia. The virtue ethicists would say that there's, again, these desires and traits of character that are present or at least indicative in cases of virtual murder, but not, pedophilia, but not virtual murder. And then there's the revisionist sort of strategy where you either reject premise 1 or premise 2, despite this sort of common conception or the sort of common sentiments that we use to motivate each of the claims. This is, again, most of the basic routes out of the dilemma. As I mentioned, there's an entire literature on this, so there's an entire grid of different ways of responding and resolving or dissolving the dilemma. But here, this is just the basic rudimentary points. So here we're at the bonus level now. So this is the extra stuff that I just wanted to mention that, if you're not just interested in the ethics of video games, there's a lot of really cool literature on this. So in metaphysics, what are video games, right? They occupy this kind of weird space between physical and virtual reality. Are they virtual? Are they are the things happening in them virtual, or are they fictional? Do we have to choose between virtual or fictional, or is it kind of a, virtual fiction? Some people go that route. So there's a general question about, how video games fit into our understanding of physical reality, given that they occupy this kind of, weird, straddling of physical and virtual spaces, and our interactions with them in particular. Also very interesting is aesthetics in video games. So there's this entire debate about whether video games are art or works of art, traditionally defined. And there's also really interesting stuff that I'm writing some stuff, and my advisor Chris Howard as well. Stuff about emotional reactions to characters in video games. If you take this amoralist line that they're just virtual or they're not really there, then you might think that there's a sort of you have to justify their rationality or how it makes sense to even have them in a way that you would think that is pitying Anna Karenina's situation, does that make sense? In the same way when I would fear a fictional character, Anna Karenina isn't any more real than the video game character. So there's this really interesting sort of overlap between the literature on emotions toward fictional characters and those in video games. Let's see. Right. Also, just the last point about aesthetics. There's this really long-standing debate about whether the moral value of an artwork, or the sort of any moral anything morally speaking that the artist might have done that would taint or just sort of detract from the work's aesthetic value. This is a big debate, and of course the video game questions and issues that we're dealing with here are very, very relevant for that as well, because how you design a video game could be one of those things that you are interested in for that. Lastly, there's some ethical issues that are sort of borderline, or stuff that I couldn't talk about today, but is nonetheless very interesting and being written about recently. So there's stuff about the moral status of trash talking other players and griefing, so intentionally sabotaging games, and then just other traditional things like teabagging other players and bullying and stuff like that. Like I mentioned, it's mostly targeting inexperienced players and exploiting them and their lack of knowledge about the game. And then, as I mentioned, I'm interested a little bit in cases where, I'm blaming someone else and I'm saying, you're cheating, but I'm also guilty of cheating. And so the idea is that I could be hypocritical for blaming you. it would be like what I do in the video game that makes it hypocritical. And that would be what you would say is like, oh, well, who are you to blame me? You've done the same thing as well. You've also cheated. And so in these cases, it's a kind of, a boundary or like a crossing of the boundary between the external issues about video games and playing them, and then the internal issues about the contents of the video game. And lastly, I have some references there that I can give to the PSA people if anyone is interested. And then I also wanted to recommend, I have the books here. These are just like some of the books that I've been reading recently, and they've really helped me think through a lot of these things, and so I'd just give a strong recommendation for all of them if you want to check more out. So yeah, that's it.